The gunshot echoed across the valley, carrying with it the last of Katherine Parker's hopes as she watched her husband's body crumple to the ground outside their farmhouse. The year was 1871, and at 42 years old, Katherine Parker found herself suddenly widowed in the unforgiving California foothills, miles from the nearest settlement of Columbia. "Titus is dead," she whispered to herself, the words hanging in the hot summer air as the band of outlaws who'd killed her husband galloped away with what little money they'd managed to save over 8 years of struggling to make the farm profitable. They'd taken everything: the strongbox, their best horse, and the future she and Titus had planned together. Katherine stood motionless, her weathered hands trembling at her sides. Her chestnut hair, streaked with silver that hadn't been there when they'd first arrived in California during the waning days of the gold rush, fell loose around her shoulders. She didn't cry. The tears would come later, she knew, when the shock wore off and reality set in. For now, she had to bury her husband. The soil was hard and unyielding, much like the life they'd carved out here. Katherine's hands blistered as she dug, refusing to stop even as the sun beat down mercilessly on her back. By nightfall, she had laid Titus Parker to rest beneath the old oak tree where they used to sit on summer evenings, dreaming of the day their farm would flourish. That night, Katherine sat alone in the small cabin they'd built together, a single candle casting long shadows across the rough-hewn walls. 8 years of memories surrounded her: the chair Titus had made for her birthday, the quilt they'd brought all the way from Boston, the pressed flower from their wedding day framed on the wall. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked the empty room, her voice breaking the silence. She was too old to start over, too worn down by years of hardship to build something from nothing again. Too tired to face the world alone. When dawn broke, Katherine made her decision. She would sell what remained of the farm and return east to her sister in Philadelphia. There was nothing left for her here, just dust, memories, and broken dreams. With determined steps, Katherine hitched her remaining horse to the wagon and loaded what few possessions hadn't been destroyed or stolen. The journey to Columbia would take most of the day, but there she could arrange the sale of her land and secure passage on the eastbound stage. Columbia, California had grown since Katherine had last visited. Once a booming gold mining town, it had settled into a respectable community of several thousand souls. False-fronted buildings lined the main street, and the constant clang of hammers and saws testified to its continuing growth. Katherine guided her wagon through the busy thoroughfare, drawing curious glances from townspeople unaccustomed to seeing a woman traveling alone. She stopped outside the land office, a small brick building wedged between the assayer's office and a mercantile. As she climbed down from the wagon, the full weight of her situation pressed down upon her shoulders. This was at the end of everything she and Titus had built together. "Can I help you with those bags, madam?" Katherine turned to find a tall man watching her with concerned blue eyes. His broad shoulders filled out a worn leather vest, and a Stetson hat shaded his tanned face. He couldn't have been much older than 35, with laugh lines around his eyes and a neatly trimmed beard that did little to hide his strong jawline. "I can manage," Katherine replied stiffly, unaccustomed to accepting help from strangers. The man nodded respectfully but didn't move away. "Name's Caleb Stone," he said, extending a weathered hand. "Town marshal. Don't often see ladies arriving alone with loaded wagons." Katherine hesitated before taking his hand. "Katherine Parker. My husband and I have had a farm about 15 miles east of here," understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes. "Had? He was killed yesterday. Outlaws." The words came out flat, emotionless. "I'm here to sell the land." Caleb's expression hardened. I'm mighty sorry to hear that, Mrs. Parker. We've had reports of a gang working this area. Did you get a look at them? 3 men. One had a scar across his cheek. They wore bandanas, but I'd know their voices. Catherine's hands tightened on her bag. Not that it matters now. It matters, Caleb said firmly. Justice matters, Mrs. Parker. For the first time since Titus fell, Catherine felt something besides numbness, a tiny spark of anger. But what good was justice now? It wouldn't bring Titus back or restore the years they'd lost. If you'll excuse me, Marshal Stone, I have business to attend to. She gestured toward the land office. Caleb stepped aside but spoke as she passed. You planning to head back east after? Catherine paused. Yes. There's nothing for me here anymore. I hope you'll reconsider, he said, surprising her. Columbia's growing. Good people are needed. Think about it before you make any final decisions. Catherine gave him a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. At my age, Marshal, starting over isn't as simple as you might think. She entered the land office, leaving Caleb standing thoughtfully in the street. Inside, she explained her situation to the clerk, a bespectacled man named Wilkins who expressed appropriate sympathy before explaining that selling the land might take time. Property's not moving as fast as it did during the rush, he explained, adjusting his glasses. And with no clear title since your husband's passing, we'll need to file paperwork with the county. Could be weeks before it's all settled. Weeks, Catherine repeated, dismayed. I haven't the funds to stay in town that long. Wilkins pursed his lips. Well, I could advance you a small sum against the eventual sale, but it won't be much. By the time Catherine emerged from the land office, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western hills. She stood on the boardwalk, clutching the meager advance that would barely cover a week's lodging, feeling more lost than she had that morning. Mrs. Parker. She turned to find Marshal Stone approaching, leading her horse and wagon. I took the liberty of watching your belongings, he explained. Town's mostly honest, but temptation has a way of testing folks. Thank you, Catherine said, genuinely grateful despite her earlier curtness. I assume from your expression that things didn't go as planned in there, Catherine sighed. The sale will take weeks to process. I don't have enough money to stay in town that long. Caleb considered this problem, then nodded decisively. I might have a solution if you're amenable. My sister Rebecca owns the boarding house just down the street. She's been looking for help since her last girl left to get married. Room and board included. I don't need charity, Marshal. It's not charity, Mrs. Parker, it's work. Hard work at that. Rebecca runs a tight ship. His eyes crinkled slightly. But it would give you a place to stay until your affairs are settled. Catherine weighed her options, which were admittedly few. I suppose I could speak with her. Excellent. Caleb took the reins of her horse. I'll show you the way. Rebecca Stone proved to be a practical, no-nonsense woman about Catherine's own age, with the same striking blue eyes as her brother but none of his easy charm. She looked Catherine up and down assessingly before agreeing to the arrangement. I need someone reliable, she stated plainly. Someone who won't run off with the first miner who flashes a gold nugget. You'll help with cooking, cleaning, and laundry. Days start at 5 and end when the work is done. I'm no stranger to hard work, Catherine replied with dignity. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. No, I don't imagine you are. Very well then. Caleb, help Mrs. Parker with her things. She can have the room at the back of the hall. That evening, Catherine sat on the narrow bed in her new quarters, a small but clean room with a window overlooking the stables behind the boarding house. She unpacked her few belongings, placing Titus's pocket watch on the simple pine nightstand and the one thing the outlaws hadn't taken, as he'd left it on their bedside table that fateful morning. I don't know if I can do this, Titus, she whispered to the empty room. I don't know if I have the strength to start again." The watch ticked softly in reply, the only sound in the quiet room as Katherine prepared for her first night alone. Life at Rebecca's boarding house quickly fell into a routine. Katherine rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the 12 permanent boarders, mostly shopkeepers, miners, and a young schoolteacher. She spent mornings cleaning rooms, afternoons washing and mending, and evenings serving dinner and tidying the common areas. The work was hard but familiar, not unlike the endless chores of farm life. What was different was the constant company. After years of isolation on the farm, Katherine found herself surrounded by people Rebecca's firm instructions, the boarders' friendly banter, and occasional visits from Marshal Stone, who seemed to find more reasons to stop by the boarding house than his official duties might require. A week into her stay, Katherine was hanging laundry in the backyard when Caleb approached, leading his horse. "Mrs. Parker," he greeted her, removing his hat. "Rebecca tells me you're settling in well." Katherine nodded, pinning a sheet to the line. "Your sister runs an orderly house." "I appreciate the opportunity. Have you heard anything more about your land?" "Mr. Wilkins says it may be another 2 weeks." Katherine sighed. "The stage leaves for Sacramento next Thursday. I'm hoping to be on it." Caleb leaned against the fence post. "Still set on leaving then?" "I have nothing here, Marshal Stone. You have skills this town needs." He gestured around them. "Columbia's changing. The gold's playing out, but families are settling, building something permanent." "I had something permanent," Katherine replied softly. "It died with Titus." Caleb studied her face. "I've been asking around about those outlaws, got some leads, thought you might want to know." Katherine paused in her work, a damp sheet forgotten in her hands. "Have you found them?" "Not yet, but we will." His voice carried absolute certainty. "Justice moves slow sometimes, but it catches up eventually. Justice won't bring back my husband or our farm." "No," Caleb agreed, "but it might bring some peace." Katherine doubted that but didn't say so. Instead, she changed the subject. "Rebecca mentioned you lost your wife some years back." A shadow crossed Caleb's face. 5 years ago, fever took her and our little boy within a week of each other. "I'm sorry," Katherine said, genuinely moved by the pain still evident in his eyes. "That's a terrible burden." "It was," Caleb acknowledged. "Still is some days. But life has a way of continuing, whether we're ready or not." He straightened, replacing his hat. "Just something to consider, Mrs. Parker, before you make your final decision about leaving." As he turned to go, Katherine called after him. "Marshal Stone, thank you. For looking into those men, I mean." He tipped his hat. "Just doing my job, madam." But they both knew it was more than that. The following Sunday, Katherine found herself accompanying Rebecca to the small white church on the edge of town. She hadn't planned to go, hadn't been to church since arriving in California, if she was honest, but Rebecca had insisted. "Can't have people thinking I work you to death," she declared. "Besides, you could use the company of more women. Too many men in this town as it is." The service was simple but heartfelt, led by a young pastor whose earnestness made up for his lack of polished oratory. Katherine sat stiffly in the pew, aware of curious glances from the townspeople. News of her situation had evidently spread. Afterward, standing in the churchyard, Katherine found herself surrounded by well-meaning women offering condolences and invitations. "You must join our sewing circle on Thursday," insisted Mrs. Henderson, the baker's wife. "We're making quilts for the orphanage in Sacramento." "And you're welcome at my home for tea anytime," added Mrs. Collins, whose husband owned the mercantile. "It's not good for a woman to be alone with her grief." Katherine murmured appropriate thanks, overwhelmed by their kindness but uncertain how to respond. She had planned to be gone by Thursday, after all. As the crowd dispersed, Caleb appeared at her side, resplendent in a clean shirt and polished boots that spoke of special effort for Sunday service. "Looks like you've been officially welcomed to Columbia society," he observed with a smile. "They're very kind," Katherine replied, "but I won't be here long enough to form attachments." "About that," Caleb lowered his voice, "I need to speak with you privately. Do you have a moment?" Curious, Katherine nodded, and they walked a short distance from the churchyard to a quiet spot beneath an oak tree. The familiar setting, so like the tree where she'd buried Titus, made her heart ache. "I've located one of the men who attacked your farm," Caleb said without preamble. "He's being held in Sonora. The sheriff there wants you to identify him." Katherine's breath caught. "You found them?" "Already. Just one. The others are still at large, but this one was captured trying to sell your husband's pocket watch to a jeweler who recognized the inscription." "Titus's watch." Katherine's hand went instinctively to her throat. "But that's impossible. I have it in my room." Caleb looked confused. "You're certain it's the same watch? The jeweler described it as silver with the inscription to TP with eternal devotion, K. That's..." Katherine faltered. "That's the inscription on the watch Titus gave me on our 10th anniversary. His watch was gold, a gift from his father. It had no inscription." Understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes. "These men may have robbed others before they came to your farm. The silver watch might help us identify another victim." "When do we leave for Sonora?" Katherine asked, resolution hardening within her. "First thing tomorrow, if you're willing. It's a day's ride." Katherine nodded. "I'll speak to Rebecca." That evening, as Katherine packed a small bag for the journey, Rebecca entered her room without knocking, a habit Katherine had come to expect from her employer. "Caleb tells me you're riding to Sonora with him tomorrow," she said, folding her arms across her chest. "Yes. I need to identify one of the men who killed Titus." Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed. "It's a hard thing facing such men. Brings it all back fresh." Katherine set her hairbrush down, surprised by the gentleness in Rebecca's usually brusque tone. "I need to do this for Titus." "For yourself, more like." Rebecca's shrewd eyes assessed her. "Closure, they call it, though I've never found such a neat ending to grief myself. You've lost someone, my husband, 12 years ago. Mining accident." Rebecca smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the bedspread. "That's when Caleb came to Columbia, to help me pick up the pieces." Katherine had wondered about the relationship between the siblings, so different in temperament yet clearly devoted to each other. "He seems like a good man." "The best," Rebecca agreed. "Too good to spend the rest of his life alone." She fixed Katherine with a meaningful look. "He likes you, you know." "Rebecca," Katherine protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks, "I'm a widow of less than 2 weeks." "I'm not suggesting you leap into his arms tomorrow," Rebecca replied dryly. "Just that you might consider Columbia has more to offer than you've allowed yourself to see." Before Katherine could formulate a response, Rebecca stood and moved to the door. "Your position here will remain open, regardless of how long you're in Sonora. Some things are more important than laundry and floors." With that unexpectedly kind statement, she departed, leaving Katherine to wonder at the layers beneath Rebecca Stone's pragmatic exterior. The journey to Sonora began at dawn, with Katherine riding side saddle on a gentle mare borrowed from the livery, and Caleb mounted on his sturdy bay gelding. They traveled mostly in comfortable silence, the beauty of the Sierra foothills spread before them in the clear autumn light. By midday, they stopped to rest by a creek, sharing the lunch Rebecca had packed: fried chicken, biscuits, and apple tarts. "Your sister is a fine cook," Katherine observed, savoring a perfectly flaky biscuit. "Don't tell her that," Caleb chuckled. "She'll work you twice as hard in the kitchen." Katherine smiled, surprising herself. When had she last smiled genuinely? She's not as harsh as she pretends to be. Rebecca's had a hard life, Caleb replied, his expression growing serious. Loves fiercely but protects herself just as fiercely. She mentioned losing her husband. Caleb nodded. She was carrying their first child when it happened, lost the baby shortly after from the shock, the doctors said. Took her years to let anyone close again. Katherine felt a pang of empathy for the stern woman who had become her employer. I understand that feeling. I imagine you do. Caleb studied her face. If you don't mind my asking, how did you and your husband come to settle in California? Katherine looked out over the rolling hills, remembering. Titus had gold fever like so many others. We came from Boston in '63 after the war. Too late for the big strikes, but Titus was convinced there was still fortune to be found. She sighed. After 2 years of finding barely enough to survive, we used what little we had to buy the farm. No children, Katherine's face tightened. We lost 3 babies before they drew breath. The doctor in Boston said I shouldn't try again, that my constitution wasn't suited for bearing children. The old pain resurfaced briefly. Titus said I was enough for him, but I always wondered. If he resented you for it, Caleb finished softly. Katherine nodded, surprised by his perception. A good man doesn't measure his wife's worth by the children she can give him, Caleb said firmly. I'm sure your husband loved you for exactly who you are. The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, loosened something tight within Katherine's chest. Thank you for that, she whispered. They continued their journey, the conversation turning to lighter topics: Caleb's childhood in Missouri, Katherine's memories of Boston, the characters who populated Columbia. By the time they reached Sonora in the late afternoon, Katherine realized she had talked more in one day than she had in months on the isolated farm. Sonora was larger than Columbia, its main street bustling with activity, even as evening approached. Caleb led the way to the sheriff's office, a substantial building of brick and timber at the center of town. Sheriff Hank Wilson was a barrel-chested man with a drooping mustache and suspicious eyes that softened when Caleb introduced Katherine. Mrs. Parker, my condolences for your loss, he said, removing his hat. Marshal Stone says you can identify one of these road agents. I believe so, Katherine replied steadily, though her heart hammered in her chest at the prospect of facing one of Titus's killers. Sheriff Wilson nodded gravely. The man we're holding calls himself Jack Riley, though I'd wager that's not his given name. Found him trying to pawn a silver watch with an inscription. When questioned, he had your husband's gold watch as well, along with other items we believe were stolen. Katherine's breath caught. You have Titus's watch. Yes, madam. It'll be returned to you, along with anything else you can identify as yours. He gestured toward the cells at the back of the office. Ready to see him? Katherine straightened her shoulders and nodded. The man in the cell looked smaller than she remembered, huddled on a narrow cot with his head in his hands. He was young, perhaps 25, with the lanky build and rough hands of someone who'd known physical labor. When he looked up at their approach, Katherine recognized him immediately by the scar that bisected his left cheek from eye to jaw. That's him, she said, her voice remarkably steady. He was there when Titus was killed. The prisoner sprang to his feet. I never killed nobody, he protested. It was Blackburn who pulled the trigger. I was just along for the ride. Sit down, Riley, Sheriff Wilson barked. You're facing the hangman either way. Accessory to murder carries the same sentence in these parts. Riley sank back onto the cot, his face ashen. I didn't want nobody to get hurt. It was supposed to be a simple robbery. Katherine stepped closer to the bars, studying the face of the man who had helped destroy her world. You watched my husband die, she said quietly. You took our money, our horse, everything we'd worked for. "I'm sorry, madam," Riley whispered, unable to meet her gaze. "Truly I am." "Who are the others?" Caleb demanded. "Give us their names and where to find them." Riley's eyes darted nervously. "Blackburn will kill me if I talk." "Blackburn isn't here," Sheriff Wilson pointed out. "But Judge Harmon will be next week, and he doesn't look kindly on murderers. Help us, and I'll tell him you cooperated." After a moment's hesitation, Riley nodded. "Blackburn and Davis. They're holed up at an old line cabin in the hills northeast of Columbia. Planning to hit the stage coming from Angel's Camp day after tomorrow." Caleb exchanged a glance with Sheriff Wilson. "We need to move quickly." "I'll send a telegram to the marshal in Angel's Camp," Wilson agreed. "We can organize a posse to catch them before they attack the stage." As they turned to leave, Riley called out, "Mrs. Parker, that money we took, it's hidden under a floorboard in the cabin, all of it. I never got my share." Katherine paused, looking back at the desperate young man. "Money won't bring my husband back." "No, madam," Riley agreed softly. "Nothing will do that." Outside the jail, Katherine found herself trembling, the full impact of the confrontation hitting her now that it was over. Caleb steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "You did well in there," he said. "Braver than most." Katherine shook her head. "I don't feel brave, I feel—" She searched for the right word. "Empty. I thought facing him would bring some satisfaction, but it's just hollow," Caleb finished for her. "I know, but you've helped ensure they won't hurt anyone else. That counts for something." Sheriff Wilson emerged from the office, interrupting their conversation. "I've sent the telegram. Marshal Stone, I'd like you to join our posse tomorrow morning. Your knowledge of the terrain around Columbia will be valuable." "Of course," Caleb agreed. "But Mrs. Parker can stay at my sister's boarding house," Wilson interjected. "Martha will make her comfortable until this business is concluded." Caleb looked to Katherine, clearly concerned about leaving her. "I don't like the idea of you being alone after this." "I'll be fine," Katherine assured him, though the prospect of being left among strangers while he pursued the remaining outlaws was unsettling. "Your duty is to catch these men before they harm anyone else." That night, in the small guest room of Martha Wilson's boarding house, Katherine lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Sonora. Her mind raced with the events of the day, Riley's haunted eyes, the revelation that Titus's watch had been recovered, and the knowledge that the remaining outlaws might soon be captured. She thought, too, of Caleb's kindness throughout the ordeal. His steady presence had become a comfort she hadn't realized she needed until now, facing the prospect of his absence tomorrow. It was foolish, she knew. She had planned to leave Columbia anyway, to return to Philadelphia and the safety of familiar surroundings. Yet the thought of bidding Caleb farewell permanently brought an unexpected ache to her chest. "This is absurd," she whispered to herself. "You're a widow, not a lovesick girl." But as sleep finally claimed her, it was Caleb's blue eyes she saw, not Titus's brown ones. Morning arrived with a flurry of activity as the posse assembled in front of the sheriff's office. 8 men, including Caleb and Sheriff Wilson, mounted on sturdy horses and armed with rifles and pistols. Katherine stood on the boardwalk with Martha Wilson, watching as final preparations were made. Caleb approached, leading his bay gelding. "We should be back by nightfall," he told Katherine. "The cabin's only about 3 hours' ride from here, but we'll take it slow to avoid alerting them." "Please be careful," Katherine said, surprising herself with the intensity of her concern. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure at her worry. "I will, and when this is over—" He hesitated. "When this is over, I hope you'll reconsider your plans to leave Columbia." Before Katherine could respond, Sheriff Wilson called for the posse to mount up. Caleb squeezed her hand briefly, then swung into the saddle, tipping his hat to her before riding away with the others. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Katherine helped Martha with chores around the boarding house, but her thoughts remained with the posse and the confrontation that might be occurring in the hills. By late afternoon, with no word of their return, her anxiety had reached a fever pitch. "They'll be fine," Martha assured her, setting a cup of tea before Katherine at the kitchen table. "Hank's been sheriff for 15 years. He knows what he's doing." "I'm sure you're right," Katherine replied, though her stomach remained knotted with worry. As dusk fell, bringing still no sign of the returning men, Martha lit lamps and prepared a simple supper, though neither woman had much appetite. They sat in the parlor afterward, Martha mending a shirt while Katherine pretended to read, her eyes repeatedly straying to the window that overlooked the main street. The clock had just struck 9 when the sound of approaching horses broke the silence. Katherine was on her feet in an instant, rushing to the window in time to see the posse returning, moving slowly through the darkened street. Martha joined her, peering through the glass. "Something's wrong," she murmured, her experienced eye taking in the slumped figures and slow pace. "Someone's hurt." They hurried outside as the riders reached the sheriff's office. In the light spilling from the windows, Katherine could see that one man was being supported in the saddle by another rider, while a second appeared to be wounded but sitting upright. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized Caleb as the man helping the badly injured rider. His shirt was dark with what could only be blood. "Caleb," she called, rushing forward as he dismounted stiffly. He turned at her voice, his face pale beneath trail dust and a day's growth of beard. "Katherine." His use of her given name barely registered as she took in his appearance. "You're hurt," she said, reaching for him. "Not mine," he assured her, though he winced as he moved. "Just bruised ribs from a fall. Davis is dead. Blackburn took a bullet, but we got him. Thompson and Jenkins are wounded. Thompson badly." Sheriff Wilson was organizing the wounded men's transfer to the doctor's office, barking orders with the efficiency of a man accustomed to crisis. Martha immediately went to help, leaving Katherine with Caleb. "What happened?" she asked, guiding him to sit on a bench outside the sheriff's office. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "They spotted us coming. Opened fire before we could call on them to surrender. Thompson took a bullet in the first volley." He grimaced. "My horse spooked and threw me. Caught a hoof in the ribs on the way down." "Let me see," Katherine demanded, her nurturing instincts overriding propriety. Too tired to argue, Caleb allowed her to unbutton his vest and lift his shirt, revealing an angry bruise spreading across his right side. "You need a doctor to check this," Katherine said, gently probing the area and noting his sharp intake of breath. "Ribs might be cracked." "Doc Harris has his hands full with Thompson and Jenkins," Caleb replied. "This can wait." "At least let me bind it for you," Katherine insisted. "It will help with the pain until the doctor can see you." Caleb acquiesced, and soon they were in Martha's kitchen, Katherine carefully wrapping bandages around Caleb's torso while he sat shirtless on a straight-backed chair, his hands braced on his knees. Katherine worked efficiently, trying to ignore the intimacy of the situation and the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. This was medical attention, nothing more. Yet she couldn't help noticing the strong lines of his shoulders, the way his muscles tensed when her fingers brushed a tender spot. "I was worried about you," she admitted softly as she secured the bandage. Caleb caught her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Were you?" Katherine met his gaze, seeing in his blue eyes a question she wasn't ready to answer. "Of course. I worry about anyone facing such danger." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Of course," he echoed, releasing her hand. "Thank you for the bandaging. It feels better already." The moment broken, Katherine stepped back, gathering the remaining bandages. "You should rest. Those ribs need time to heal." "We'll head back to Columbia tomorrow," Caleb said, carefully pulling his shirt back on. "Sheriff Wilson can handle things here. Blackburn will stand trial along with Riley." "Justice for Titus," Katherine murmured. Caleb paused in buttoning his shirt. "Does it help knowing they'll be punished?" Katherine considered the question honestly. "A little," she admitted. "But it doesn't change what happened, doesn't bring him back or restore what was lost." "No," Caleb agreed quietly. "Some losses can never be restored. We can only move forward from where we stand." The wisdom in his words struck Katherine deeply. Moving forward, it sounded so simple, yet the prospect had seemed impossible just days ago. Now, though, standing in this warm kitchen with this good man before her, the future didn't seem quite so bleak. "Get some rest, Caleb," she said gently. "Tomorrow is soon enough to think about moving forward." The return journey to Columbia the next day was necessarily slow due to Caleb's injured ribs. They departed mid-morning after a hearty breakfast at Martha's table, Katherine having declined Sheriff Wilson's offer to arrange escort on the stage. "Marshal Stone is escort enough," she'd said firmly, surprising herself with the declaration. Now, as they rode side by side through sun-dappled forests and across rolling meadows, Katherine found herself stealing glances at Caleb's profile, admiring the quiet strength in his bearing despite his obvious discomfort. "We should stop and rest," she suggested as noon approached. "Your ribs need time to recover," Caleb nodded, guiding his horse toward a small clearing beside a stream. "This looks as good a spot as any." They dismounted Caleb with some difficulty, and Katherine spread a blanket in the shade of an oak tree. From her saddlebag, she produced the lunch Martha had packed for their journey: cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apples. As they ate, Katherine broached the subject that had been on her mind since the previous night. "When we return to Columbia, I'll need to make arrangements." Caleb looked up sharply. "You're still planning to leave?" Katherine smoothed the blanket beside her, avoiding his gaze. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me still believes that returning to Philadelphia is the sensible choice. My sister is there, and familiar surroundings." "And the other part?" Caleb prompted gently. "The other part wonders if starting over might be possible after all." She finally met his eyes. "If Columbia might have a place for me." Something like hope flickered in Caleb's expression. "Columbia definitely has a place for you. Rebecca would keep you on at the boarding house in a heartbeat, or the school needs an assistant teacher. Mrs. Thornton at the millinery was saying just last week she could use help with the sewing." Katherine couldn't help smiling at his eagerness. "You seem to have given this some thought." "Maybe I have." Caleb's tone grew serious. "Katherine, I know it's too soon to speak of such things. Your grief is still fresh, and I respect that. But I want you to know that if you stayed in Columbia, there would be possibilities." The word hung between them, laden with meaning. Katherine's heart quickened at the implications, even as her mind cautioned restraint. "I'm too old to start over," she said softly, voicing the fear that had haunted her since Titus's death. Caleb reached across the blanket, taking her hand in his. "Then we'll start together," he replied, his voice steady with conviction. "Neither of us would be starting from nothing. We both carry our pasts, the joys and the sorrows, but perhaps that's what makes a new beginning possible." Katherine stared at their joined hands, weathered by work and time. "It's frightening," she whispered. "Yes," Caleb agreed simply, "but I think the best beginnings often are." They sat in companionable silence for a time, listening to the stream's gentle murmur and the birds calling in the trees above. Katherine felt a strange peace settling over her, as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis, opening a vista she hadn't believed possible just days ago. "I'll stay," she decided aloud. At least until my land is sold. After that, we'll see what possibilities arise. Caleb's smile was like sunrise after a long night. That's all I ask. A chance. They reached Columbia by late afternoon, the familiar buildings of the main street welcoming them back. Rebecca was sweeping the boarding house porch when they arrived, her stern expression softening at the sight of her brother's obvious injury. "What happened?" she demanded, helping Katherine dismount. "Thrown from my horse," Caleb explained, easing himself carefully from the saddle. "Caught a hoof in the ribs." "Fool man," Rebecca muttered, but her hands were gentle as she helped him inside. "Always getting yourself into trouble." "It's his job," Katherine defended him, following them into the boarding house. "And he captured the men who killed Titus, all of them." Rebecca's sharp eyes assessed Katherine's face. "And how do you feel about that?" "Grateful," Katherine replied honestly, "but ready to look forward now, not back." Something like approval flashed in Rebecca's expression. "Good, then you'll be staying on, if the position is still available." "It is," Rebecca confirmed. "Though from the way my brother is looking at you, I suspect your time as my employee may be limited." "Rebecca," Caleb protested, color rising to his cheeks despite his pallor. Katherine felt her own face warm, but she met Rebecca's knowing gaze steadily. "One step at a time." Rebecca nodded, satisfied. "Sensible. Now let's get this brother of mine settled before he falls over. Katherine, there's beef stew simmering in the kitchen. Would you see to it while I make up Caleb's old room? He's in no condition to walk home tonight." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Katherine continued working at the boarding house, finding unexpected satisfaction in the routine and the growing friendships with the boarders and townspeople. She joined Mrs. Henderson's quilting circle on Thursdays, discovered a talent for millinery under Mrs. Thornton's tutelage, and began assisting at the school one afternoon a week. Columbia was embracing her, and slowly, she was embracing it back. Caleb recovered gradually from his injuries, resuming his duties as marshal while making time each day to visit the boarding house. Their relationship developed carefully, respectfully shared meals, walks through town, conversations on the porch in the evening as summer gave way to autumn. Titus remained in Katherine's heart, a cherished memory that no longer overshadowed her present. She still wore his gold watch, recovered from Blackburn and returned to her, but she kept it in a drawer rather than carrying it daily, a part of her past, not her present. In late October, Mr. Wilkins from the land office brought news that a buyer had been found for the farm. The price was fair, providing Katherine with a modest nest egg that secured her future. "What will you do with the money?" Caleb asked that evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset paint the hills gold and crimson. "Some will go to my sister in Philadelphia," Katherine decided. "The rest I'm considering investing in a small business here in Columbia." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "What kind of business?" "A taroom, perhaps. Something genteel for the ladies of Columbia, now that the town is becoming more civilized." Katherine smiled at the idea, which had been forming in her mind for weeks. "Rebecca says the space next to the millinery will be vacant soon." "You're really staying, then?" Caleb asked, his voice carefully neutral though his eyes betrayed his hope. Katherine turned to face him fully. "Yes, Caleb, I'm staying." The joy that transformed his features was worth every moment of uncertainty she'd experienced. He took her hands in his touch gentle yet certain. "Katherine, I know it's only been a few months since we met and your loss is still fresh, but I find myself thinking of you constantly, dreaming of a future together." He paused, searching her face. "I'm not asking for promises yet, just permission to court you properly, to see where this path might lead us." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, not tears of grief this time, but of unexpected joy. At 42, she had never imagined finding love again, had believed that chapter of her life closed forever with Titus's death. Yet here was this good, kind man offering her a second chance at happiness. "Yes," she whispered, squeezing his hands. "I would like that very much." Caleb's smile was radiant in the fading light. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a gentle, questioning kiss that spoke of promise rather than passion. Katherine closed her eyes, surrendering to the sweetness of the moment. When they parted, she saw her own wonder reflected in Caleb's gaze. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she admitted softly. "Nor I," Caleb replied. "It seems we've both been given a second chance." Winter descended on Columbia, bringing crisp mornings and occasional dustings of snow that transformed the town into a scene from a Christmas card. Catherine's Taroom, which she had named New Beginnings, opened in early December to immediate success among the ladies of Columbia, who welcomed a refined alternative to the saloons that dominated the town's social life. Caleb courted her with old-fashioned dignity, escorting her to church socials, bringing small gifts that showed his thoughtfulness, spending quiet evenings in conversation by the fire. Their relationship deepened with each passing day, built on shared experiences and mutual respect. By Christmas, Katherine had moved from the boarding house to small but comfortable rooms above her taroom, much to Rebecca's feigned dismay and secret approval. The space was entirely her own, decorated with treasured items from her past and new acquisitions that reflected her present contentment. On Christmas Eve, Caleb invited her to dinner at his modest home on the outskirts of town, a cabin he had built himself after settling in Columbia, expanded and improved over the years until it was a proper house with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a stone fireplace that dominated the main room. "It's beautiful," Katherine said as he showed her around, admiring the craftsmanship evident in every detail. "You've created a real home here." "It was just a house until tonight," Caleb replied softly. "Having you here makes it a home." He'd prepared dinner himself, a roast chicken with all the trimmings, only slightly overcooked, which Katherine pronounced delicious. Afterward, they sat before the fire, sipping cider and enjoying the simple pleasure of being together on the holy night. "I have something for you," Caleb said, reaching beneath the tree to retrieve a small package wrapped in red paper and tied with a green ribbon. Katherine accepted it with a smile. "And I have something for you, but it's at my rooms. I didn't expect an exchange tonight." "Open it," Caleb encouraged, watching her face intently. Katherine carefully unwrapped the gift to reveal a velvet box. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, lay a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny portrait of Titus on one side, a miniature painted from the daguerreotype she kept on her dresser. "Caleb," she breathed, tears filling her eyes. "How did you?" "I sent the daguerreotype to a painter in San Francisco," he explained. "I wanted you to have a way to keep him close to your heart while leaving your hands free for a new life." The thoughtfulness of the gift overwhelmed her. That Caleb would understand her need to honor Titus's memory rather than erasing it, that he would actively help her carry her past into her future, it spoke volumes about the man he was. "The other side is empty," Caleb continued quietly, "for whatever comes next." Katherine looked up at him through her tears, understanding dawning. "Caleb," he moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "Katherine Parker, these past months have shown me that love can bloom again even after the harshest winter. You've brought light back into my life when I thought the darkness would last forever." He reached into his pocket, producing a simple gold band. "I'm asking you to fill the empty space in that locket and in my life. Will you marry me? Catherine's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. She looked into Caleb's earnest blue eyes, seeing the love and hope there, and found her answer without hesitation. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. Yes, I will marry you, Caleb Stone. His smile was like sunshine as he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. It was my grandmother's, he explained. Rebecca has been keeping it safe for me, waiting for the right woman to wear it. I'll treasure it, Katherine promised, admiring the way the firelight caught the gold band. Caleb rose to sit beside her on the settee, drawing her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their commitment. When they parted, Katherine rested her head on his shoulder, content in a way she had never expected to feel again. When? Caleb asked simply. Katherine considered. Spring, she decided, when everything is new again. April, Caleb agreed, giving us time to prepare properly. They sat together watching the fire, making plans for their future where they would live. Caleb's house, with some feminine touches added. How Katherine would manage her room as a married woman, with help from the capable young woman she'd hired. Whether they might still have a chance at a family adoption was a possibility they both embraced. As the clock struck midnight, Caleb kissed her again, whispering "Merry Christmas" against her lips. Katherine returned the sentiment, marveling at the journey that had brought her from despair to joy in the space of 6 months. I was so certain my life was over when Titus died, she confessed, tracing the strong line of Caleb's jaw with her fingertips. So convinced I was too old to begin again. Caleb caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. And now? Katherine smiled, seeing their future stretching before them like a road bathed in morning light. Now I know that age is just a number. It's courage that counts, the courage to step forward into the unknown, trusting that something beautiful awaits. Together, Caleb reminded her, echoing his words from that day on the trail. Together, Katherine agreed, certain now that it was the only way to truly begin anew. Their wedding took place on a perfect April morning, with apple blossoms scenting the air and meadowlarks singing in the hills around Columbia. The small white church was filled to capacity, with townspeople who had come to celebrate the union of their Marshal and the room proprietress, who had become beloved fixtures of the community. Rebecca served as Katherine's matron of honor, her usual sternness softened by genuine happiness for her brother and the woman who had become her friend. Sheriff Wilson stood as Caleb's best man, having traveled from Sonora for the occasion. Katherine wore a gown of ivory silk, modest yet elegant, with a lace collar that had belonged to her mother. In her hair, she wore a wreath of spring flowers, and around her neck, the locket Caleb had given her at Christmas, now with his miniature portrait joining Titus's on the opposite side, symbolizing the continuity of love in her life. When Pastor Johnson pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the congregation nearly lifted the rafters. Caleb kissed his bride with restrained passion, mindful of their audience but unable to completely hide the depth of his feelings. The celebration continued at Katherine's room, transformed for the day with garlands of flowers and tables laden with food prepared by Rebecca and the ladies of the quilting circle. There was dancing in the street, music provided by local fiddle players, and enough goodwill to sustain the newlyweds through whatever challenges might lie ahead. As evening fell, Caleb led his wife home to their house, now enhanced with Katherine's feminine touches, curtains at the windows, quilts on the beds, and flowers in vases throughout the rooms. A fire welcomed them in the hearth, and on the table, a wedding gift from Rebecca, a fine china tea service to civilize my brother properly, as her note explained. "Welcome home, Mrs. Stone," Caleb said, lifting Katherine over the threshold despite her laughing protests about his still healing ribs. "Careful," she admonished as he set her gently on her feet in the center of the main room. "I won't have you re-injuring yourself on our wedding night." Caleb's eyes darkened at the mention of the night ahead. They had waited, respecting the conventions of their time and their own sense of propriety. Now, standing in the home they would share, the anticipation between them was palpable. "I love you, Katherine," Caleb said simply, framing her face with his hands. "I will spend the rest of my days showing you how much." "And I love you," Katherine replied, her heart full to overflowing. "More than I ever thought possible." Their kiss was a promise, a beginning, a declaration of faith in the future they would build together. As Caleb led her toward their bedroom, Katherine sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the second chance she'd been given, and for the man who had shown her that it's never too late to start over, as long as you don't have to start alone. 5 years later, Katherine sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Caleb taught their adopted son, James, to throw a lasso in the yard. The boy, now 8, had come to them 3 years earlier, an orphan whose parents had died of influenza while traveling west. The judge in Columbia, knowing of the Stones' desire for a family, had suggested they might provide the home the child desperately needed. From the moment James entered their lives, he had filled a space they hadn't fully realized was empty. His quick mind and gentle spirit had won their hearts immediately, and watching him grow under their care had brought Katherine a joy she had once thought forever denied her. "Mama, did you see?" James called, successfully looping his rope around the practice post Caleb had set up. "I did it." "Wonderful, darling," Katherine called back, clapping her hands. "You'll be roping cattle before we know it." Beside her in a smaller rocking chair sat 4-year-old Elizabeth, contentedly coloring in a book while her rag doll sat propped against the porch railing. The little girl had joined their family just 2 years ago, another orphan in need of love, completing their family circle in a way none of them had anticipated. Rebecca emerged from the house, carrying a tray with lemonade and cookies. At 52, she remained as formidable as ever, though her sharp edges had softened somewhat with the years. She had sold the boarding house last year, using the proceeds to build a small cottage on Caleb and Katherine's property, where she lived independently, but within easy reach of the family she adored. "Those two will be at it until dark if you let them," she observed, setting the tray on the small table between the rocking chairs. Katherine smiled, accepting a glass of lemonade. "Caleb loves teaching him. Says it makes up for all the years he thought he'd never have a son." Rebecca settled into the third rocker, reaching over to straighten Elizabeth's hair ribbon. "And you? Any regrets about the path you chose?" Katherine considered the question seriously, as she always did when Rebecca asked it, which happened every year on the anniversary of Titus's death. Today marked 7 years since that terrible day, yet the pain had transformed over time into a gentle melancholy that no longer threatened to overwhelm her. "Not a single one," she answered honestly. "I miss Titus still, of course. I always will. But the life I've found here with Caleb, with the children, with you and all our friends in Columbia, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." Rebecca nodded, satisfied. "Good, because my brother worships the ground you walk on, you know." "The feeling is entirely mutual," Katherine assured her, watching as Caleb hoisted James onto his shoulders in celebration of the boy's accomplishment. As if sensing her gaze, Caleb looked up, his smile as warm and genuine as it had been the day they met. 7 years had added a few more lines to his face and threads of silver to his hair, but to Katherine, he was more handsome than ever, a man who had kept every promise he'd made, who had shown her daily what it meant to love and be loved in return. "Mama, Aunt Rebecca, come see what I can do," James called, scrambling down from his father's shoulders. "Coming, darling," Katherine called back, rising from her chair and extending a hand to Elizabeth. "Shall we go see your brother's trick, sweetheart?" The little girl nodded eagerly, slipping her small hand into her mother's. Together, the three women descended the porch steps to join Caleb and James in the yard, forming a circle of love and belonging that had seemed impossible on that long-ago day when Katherine had believed her life was over. As the golden afternoon light bathed them all in its warm glow, Katherine caught Caleb's eye over their children's heads and saw in his gaze the same thought that filled her heart. This was what starting over truly meant: not erasing the past, but building upon it to create something new and beautiful, one day at a time, together.